with us. When your album drops,
I know, right?
I won't even tell Fernando Ortega or anyone else you want to cover. Let's just post it on the website, and we have a little thing in our website in the back end where for music where you can like create. I guess if your church worship team wants to record music, you can put it on there and it will appear somewhere in the app or the website or something. Haven't yet put anything on there, but we might have to start here soon. All right, I'll stop embarrassing you, but thank you very much for sharing. No, I was going to go to Brother Michael next. Okay. That was a wonderful prayer, and I appreciate the prayer for the hummingbirds. Laura, who abandoned me, by the way, you noticed she was sitting with me, and then she went over there to go sit with you guys. My estranged wife put a hummingbird feeder that sticks onto the window in the girls' room, and so oftentimes, we walk into their room or something, and the hummingbird and I just kind of make eye contact, and yeah. I just said, bring me back some enchiladas, I mean, that's all I ask. Fly back with something. We feed you all summer. All right. That's all I got to say about that. All right. I digress. The end is near again. It's near again and again and again and again and again. And there's so many stories I wanted to talk about, but I cut them out about how people thought the world was going to end at innumerable places over the past 2,000 years. Of course, it's happened a lot recently, different groups setting dates of when Jesus was supposed to come. Yeah, you got William Miller, 1843, 1844, but you got other people, 1845, just going through the 1840s into the 1850s, 1914, on and on and on and on. There's been plenty of occasions where people thought the world was going to end. Again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Jesus told us to learn the lesson of the fig tree. He said, when you see the tender shoots coming out and you see the leaves growing on the tree, they said that's when you know that summer is near. You should be able to discern the signs of what is coming. Yes. And yet people, decade after decade after decade after decade, century after century, have read the signs and thought the world was ending in their lifetime. We're still here. Spoiler alert, I didn't want to give that away. We're still here. We're still here. Martin Luther, it said, once gave this is what Winfried Vogel has written about Luther. Luther once remarked that a whole book could be filled with the signs that happened in his day and that pointed to the approaching end of the world 500 years ago. Luther said a whole book can be filled with the signs that the end is near. A whole book. Book he didn't write, by the way. And yet, we are still here. Mm-hmm. So what is up with our ability to read signs? I mean, we often treat them, Luther, everybody always treats the signs as if it's common sense. Just look. Everybody can see it. Yeah. The end is near. 500 years later. Now, Luther, to his credit, did say it could be another 300 years before the end of the world. But that too has passed. And we're still here. So I thought we would go back to Matthew chapter 24. This is called the mini apocalypse. This section of Matthew, Luke has a portion of this too. Mark has a portion of this too. It's in the synoptic gospels, those three gospels. But this is called the mini apocalypse. It's not Daniel, it's not Revelation, but you got a little bit of that flavor in the gospel. So let's look at this, because this is the chapter. When you want to talk about signs of the times, this is the chapter people go to more than anywhere else in the Bible. So let's look at them. I may step on a few toes today. So if you have steel-toed boots, put them on and you'll be fine. All right. Let's go to Matthew chapter 24. Begin in verse 3. Just set this up. What's going on here? It says, as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. This is not a conversation they wanted to have publicly. And they said, tell us, when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, what provoked this, by the way, was that when Jesus left the temple, he was walking away with his disciples. In verse 1 says his disciples came up to point out the beauty of the temple buildings. And Jesus told them, truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. So there's a couple things to note about this whole, this is chapter 24, chapter 25, and so on. This whole long apocalyptic section of the Gospel of Matthew was not a conversation that Jesus initiated. Jesus was walking away from the temple. The disciples pointed to the temple and it says, look how great it is. Essentially, and Jesus says, one day it's all going to be destroyed. And that bothered them because obviously the temple was where the presence of God was supposed to be. Like this is where salvation happens, with the sacrifices and all this stuff. So it bothers them that Jesus would say all this is going to be destroyed. I'm sure Jesus wasn't just flippant about it, but it seems like that warranted an extended conversation. If you're walking through in Washington, D.C. or something, there's no parallel that we have to the significance of the temple in the ancient world. But, and someone's like, all of this stuff is going to be knocked down someday, and you think, what? That's a really big deal. It hasn't happened in a couple hundred years. Well, obviously, it's the British fault, Laura. Yeah. Anyway, so the point is, little War of 1812 reference there for you guys. But anyway, so it's more significant, of course, that the temple gets destroyed. More significant the temple gets destroyed. And so the disciples want to follow up on this conversation. So they approach Jesus privately later. Again, this is not a conversation Jesus initiated. They approached Jesus and privately asked him, can you explain what you meant by that? And so that's when we get a couple more chapters in Matthew. So I am very thankful for curious disciples because we get a couple more chapters in the gospel because of that. And so don't be afraid to ask questions of Jesus because you may get more information than you otherwise would have gotten. Jesus could have covered any number of subjects. I wish he would have talked about investments in 2023, but that was one subject he didn't cover. For some reason, the disciples did not ask him about that. But what can you do? We got this instead. So please understand, this is not a section Jesus initiated, but of course, he was happy to expound upon it for quite some time. All right. So in this section, I'm going to just look at I'm just looking at chapter 24. We're not going to get into chapter 25. In this chapter, Jesus wants to make a couple things very, very, very clear to them. And one of those things is not, and here's where I'm going to get a little controversial with some of you. One of those things is not, what are the signs of the times? He does not answer that question directly. In fact, the only time he mentions a sign of the time is in verse 30. He says, then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of glory. Not exactly a sign that you're going to be forewarned by a long period of time. That's the only time he uses the word sign here to indicate some kind of something you can look for to tell when the coming is near. Now, he does emphasize with that bit about the fig tree the importance of paying attention. But he does not give us a list of signs. You say, well, Matthew, what are these first few verses, these things we quote all the time? All right, let's go through them. This is what Jesus said. All right, they ask him, expand on this a little bit more for me. And so he says, watch out that no one deceives you. That's the first thing he says. He doesn't say sign number one. He says, don't be deceived. And there's a reason for this. We'll get to it in just a second. It says, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Then he goes on, such things must happen, but the end is what? Still to come. So false messiahs, wars and rumors of wars, and as he gets into here, more wars and famines, earthquakes in various places. And then he says, all these are the beginnings of birth pains. Now, these are not the signs. What Jesus is wanting them to understand is that first line, don't be deceived. Don't be distracted by things that are routine tragedies on this planet. Unfortunately, war is ever present. Famines, earthquakes, pestilences, whatever, natural disasters are ever present. People coming to trick you, to con you, to deceive you, ever present since the time of Jesus until now. What Jesus is saying is, these are not the signs. The things that you might be tempted to think are signs. We have a second world war. That must be the end is near. The things that we are tempted to see as signs, Jesus is saying, don't be deceived. And he says this, over and over and over again, right? Don't be deceived. Don't be alarmed. he goes on here, such things must happen. The end is still to come. These are just the beginning of, I don't know how he can be any clearer about his message in these first couple verses. Is that he's just, don't get tricked by what appear to be signs, but are not. Now, what about this false Messiah? But what is he getting at here? Because for us sophisticated people, that seems like a really poor temptation. I'm not going to believe somebody who claims to be Jesus. And I think it's a little bit more broad than that. Of course, we had these false messiahs running around in the first century. There were a lot of them. Some people think that Barabbas, the person who Jesus took the place of at his death, some people think that Barabbas was one of those false messiahs who had been kidnapped. Somebody who especially promised political deliverance from Rome, and that he had been one of those kinds of people. But it's not just that. It's not just people who show up claiming to be Jesus. Really, a false Messiah just means it's just anointed one, or we look at it as somebody who is coming to save us, somebody who is coming to solve the sin problem for us. A false Messiah can be anyone or anything that claims to solve our deepest problem of how do we achieve salvation? How can we be saved? It could be a thing. It could be a person. It could be if somebody has a special dedication to self-helpism. How can I overcome in my own life and get there? It could be a religious teacher. It could be any number of things. Whatever it is that promises you salvation can be a false Christ if it isn't the real Christ. Okay? So let's not look down our noses at some of these things like, who would fall for that? Lots of people are looking everywhere but in the right direction for salvation. So there's these false Christs. We have these rumors and wars and rumors of wars, and we've got these natural disasters and political turmoil, all these things Jesus describes here. He says, don't get alarmed by these things. These are not the signs. These are only the beginning. And so the first thing that Jesus wants his followers to understand is not to get spooked by what happens, but be, I'll say, a little skeptical of these things. Be a little skeptical. There's always going to be wars. There's always going to be earthquakes. There's always going to be fake saviors coming to deceive people. He warns us not to believe. By the way, he'll even go on when he talks about these false Christs a little bit later on. He'll even say, he says, at that time, someone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is. Do not believe it. In other words, be skeptical. When people make these claims, be a little bit skeptical of these people. And then in verse 24, he says, for false messiahs and false prophets, he adds prophets to this as well, people who claim to be speaking for God but aren't. We have those today as well. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders, he says. And he knows we're looking for signs. So there might be a special temptation then for Jesus' followers to see these signs and wonders that the false prophets and false messiahs are working and believe them. But Jesus is saying, be skeptical. That's why he says in verse 25, see, I told you ahead of time. Why does he tell us this ahead of time? So we won't just fall for it when someone works what seems to be a miracle in the name of somebody other than the real Christ. So Jesus wants us to not get spooked by the headlines. There's another war, there's another earthquake, but to be a little bit skeptical of some of the claims of these people who are going to show up and try to lead you and I astray. Now, he compares here, interestingly, in verse 8, he says, all these are the beginning of birth pains, right? He's comparing his return to delivery of a baby, and which is preceded by all these contractions, which in this metaphor are the signs. And he's saying all these things, the wars, the false Christs, the earthquakes and natural disasters, all these are the beginning of birth pains. These are like Braxton Hicks contractions. They're not actually indicative that, how do I know? I have not gone through it, Matt. I want you to know this. These days you may have to explain that, but I happen to have been there in the delivery room a couple times, and one time Ohio State game may have been on, but
Full concentration.
Yeah, full concentration on. I didn't have a lot to do except be helpful, so. Matt, why you leave me down here? Why you trap a brother like this? All right. It's not like I've done anything to you. All right. So don't be deceived by the practice labor here. This, don't run to the hospital every time you feel something. Just understand that just because it's something's going on in the headlines doesn't mean Jesus is coming right now, right? These things, it takes time. And anyway, so I think that's I don't think they had the word Braxton Hicks back then, but I think they had the idea. They understood what childbirth was like, and they got that sometimes just because you feel like you're having a contraction doesn't mean you're about to give birth. And so what does that mean then? Does that mean that the wars and rumors of wars and false messiahs and natural disasters means nothing to us? Does that mean we should just ignore them and they have no significance? No, I think this note in the Andrews Study Bible is really, really good. It says, these events are not intended to tell us the specific time of the second coming, but to remind us of the reality of that coming. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we get a war. It doesn't mean he's coming tomorrow, but it might just be another reminder, which we need, that Jesus really is coming back. And we need him to come back, and I want him to come back because we collectively, as human beings, seem powerless to prevent some of these great atrocities that are happening on this earth. Certainly powerless against these natural disasters. And we need Jesus to come and create new people and a new heavens and a new earth. So we allow these things not to distress us, not to discourage us, not to get us all hyped up it's coming tomorrow, it's coming tomorrow, it's coming tomorrow. Just settle down, but let them remind you of the reality that is coming. Okay? Now that leads us in. So that's the first thing Jesus wanted us to do. Don't be spooked. Be a little bit skeptical of these things. Don't let the latest natural disaster or political turmoil cause you to rush to the hospital thinking the delivery is near. Don't get too excited. But allow these things, I think, to remind you of what is coming. Now that's the first thing Jesus warns about. Then Jesus warns us about something else. Here in verse, we'll jump down to 37. It says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, this is how he describes it. People were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. That's a really interesting connection. He wants to connect the second coming to the flood in terms of a sudden, catastrophic event that takes people unawares. And so, I think it's funny Jesus says they didn't know what was going to happen until the flood came. And like, well, Noah was preaching for 120 years. So, I understand what he means. Like they were just living their best life and then suddenly it rained and it didn't stop. Right? So I get what he means. It doesn't mean that they had no warning whatsoever. Of course they did. But they just didn't listen. And so what Jesus is saying is, shape your expectations about the end days. It's not going to be apocalyptic in the sense that asteroids are hitting the earth and there's famine and half of everybody is starving. Jesus is saying the end times are going to look normal. People are going to be planning weddings. They're going to be hosting dinner parties. They're going to be going out to eat. It's going to look normal until it isn't. Until it isn't. And that's what, so what is Jesus trying to say here? Well, like I said, in the first bit of this chapter, he wants people to not get alarmed, not get spooked, but be a little bit skeptical and not just get thrown, not everything is a sign. Don't get sucked into it, to the headline watching. But on the other hand, Jesus wants to remind people that things are going to look normal, but they're very much not actually normal behind the scenes. Laura and I just cut down a tree earlier this spring. I mean, we didn't do it, obviously. We had it done. Because it was a great tree. We loved that tree. It was a fantastic tree. In fact, we have two trees, and the tree we hate is the one that's still standing, and we had to cut down the actual tree that we liked. It's really annoying. And that's how it always goes, right? And so, it was, if you would have asked me in the winter, you would ask me last year, is this tree healthy? I'd say, sure, it looks great, it's strong. And then one day the front just fell off the trunk and you see this, it's been hollowed out over a period of time. And that's very much how the end times is going to go. Everyone's going to look at the tree, it looks fine, and you don't realize that the world has been hollowed out on the inside, and then suddenly it's too late. Like, what are you going to do? You can't save the tree now. You can't do anything about it. Maybe, I don't know what exactly happened to it. You might have a chance if you catch something early, if there's an insect or something, maybe. But everything looks normal until it's too late. And that's what he's saying. Just like in the days of Noah, that's how it's going to be in the last days. And so while we shouldn't be spooked and we should be a little bit skeptical, we can't be so skeptical that we just think it was normal yesterday and it was normal the day before and it was normal 3 days ago, so it's just going to be normal forever and ever and ever and ever. This is what 2 Peter is getting at when he says, above all, you must understand that in the last days, scoffers are going to come, scoffing and following their own evil desires. And he says, they will say, where is his coming? Where is this coming he promised? Ever since our ancestors died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation. These are people, by the way, that Peter's describing as believers. Because they talk about their ancestors, they talk about the beginning of creation. These are people who believe these things, but they've given up waiting. Because every day is the same. Things have gone on every day since the beginning of creation. Nothing is going to change. We're just going to keep going. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so I think Jesus is trying to warn us from two extremes here. On the one hand is to get hyped up about every headline and to look for signs that aren't really signs, but they're just everyday parts of living in a sinful world. There's going to be wars and natural disasters and stuff. But on the other hand, Jesus is warning us about becoming so skeptical that we get complacent and we no longer think anything is going to happen. And I think that's really interesting because the disciples asked Jesus about what signs should we look for. And Jesus' reply is essentially, don't get overly hyped up on signs, but also don't get so skeptical about signs that you don't see it coming. Jesus is less worried about giving us a roadmap to the second coming than he is about what kind of people we are going to be as his followers. At the very end of this chapter, Jesus tells a story about a master who left and put his servant in charge. And the servant had other servants under him, and his job was to make sure the household ran. Bills get paid, the other servants get fed, right? Everything is running smoothly. The master's interests are being looked out for. And so Jesus says, just very understatedly in verse 46, that someday the master is going to return. And in verse 46, Jesus says, it will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. That is, taking care of the house when he returns. And so, just because the fence gate opens doesn't mean that the master has returned. Don't be spooked by every voice you hear outside thinking, oh, he's coming back, he's coming back. But on the other hand, don't be one of those masters who thinks he's never coming back. All of this is mine now. He put me in charge because it's not yours. And the moment you think it's yours, the moment you think this life is yours, the moment you think it's yours to direct and control and treat however you want, is the moment we're going to be in trouble when the master does return. So I think this is what Jesus is worried about here at the end of the chapter, is how we will be found when he returns. In Luke, he doesn't put this in Matthew, but in Luke, Jesus just bluntly says, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on the earth? That's right. When he returns, are we still going to be faithfully waiting? Because there seems to be, I don't know if worry is the right word to apply to Jesus, but there seems to be a concern that we will get so tired of waiting that we'll give up. And so I feel like Jesus is warning us against two extremes here. Yes. Because he is concerned about how we will be as we wait for the second coming. What kind of believers, what kind of followers are we going to be? Are we going to be hyped up that everything is significant? Jesus is like, no, it's not. There's a lot of it. It's just you living in a sinful world, and that's just what happens in a sinful world. People are going to behave beastly to each other. On the other hand, don't be so skeptical of the things that happen that you no longer are able to tell that I am returning. I am actually coming back. I didn't abandon you here. I'm returning for you. This salvation story is not over yet. You are not home yet. I will come back and get you home. So don't let that skepticism of the headlines become so radical that you no longer have faith in me that I'm coming back to get you. And the way that we can tell whether we have that faith that Jesus really is coming back to get us. The way we can tell we really believe that is how we manage the things God has given us. Am I making decisions over my own life and the life of my family and the life of the things, the material things God has given me? Am I making decisions that are, this is what Matthew thinks is best? Or am I treating these things in such a way where I recognize I'm managing them for its rightful owner, who will return? And you know, again, back then they get this whole servant thing. We don't have servants today, except parents are servants of the children. They think that they are. The kids think that, at least. We don't have servants today, but the whole idea of this concept of these things are being given to you in trust to manage for its rightful owner. Jesus tells a similar story over and over and over again about servants. I mean, just from different angles, you know, they were given talents, and it's how well they use those talents. I mean, just different angles. He's trying to get at the same thing. This is a really important point for Jesus. It's like, how are we going to treat, are we going to look at the things that he has given us, our very lives, our families, our houses, our stuff, our opportunities? Are we going to look at these things as if they belong to me, I earned it, it's mine, I can do with it whatever I want? Or are we going to look at it as all of this is a blessing from God, and I may one day have to give account to God for how I handled the things that he gave me, the privileges that he gave me, the opportunities that he gave me, my own very life that he gave me? That someday I have to stand before him and explain how I used this great gift that he has bestowed upon me. And are we going to have that worldview where it's all his? And I think once we can let go of so much stress out of our lives when we realize it's not my kingdom to build. It's not my thing to stress over. I'm not the one who's got to worry about being conquered by that neighboring kingdom. I'm not the one who's got to worry about getting ahead of this other person at work. It's all his, and it's just my job to manage it well. And I don't want to be a good servant. I want to be a shrewd servant. I want to make good decisions with his stuff, right? I don't want to be that servant who buries the talent. I want to be the servant who invests it well and makes smart decisions. But at the end of the day, it's not mine, it's his, and I'll be very happy to return it to him if he wants it, because he has been good to me. So, I've watched a bunch of sermons that go through Matthew 24, and they're like, here's 20 signs of the end times, and I don't see them. I don't think that's Jesus' concern. That's why he says very explicitly in verse 36, about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, nor of the Father. And that's when he starts talking about in the days of Noah. I don't want to be lulled by what appears to be normal into thinking it's going to be like this forever. If you're looking for meteors and global famines and all of this stuff before you start thinking the end is near, I think we're going to be surprised, because, as he said, in the days of Noah, people are planning marriages and stuff. Okay, it's not a catastrophic apocalyptic film that we're going to be living. It's not a dystopian drama necessarily. But it's going to look normal. You're not going to be able to have this conversation with people. Yeah, but look at this. This is abnormal, because you're going to have reasonable people who are saying it's not abnormal. This is how things have always been. And in the manner of speaking, I mean, there are some things that happen that are new and surprising, but we've had wars forever. We've had famines and earthquakes and human tragedies of any sort forever and ever and ever. It's hard to pick something that has not happened before. Maybe on a bigger scale, maybe, something a little bit more weaponized, using biological agents or something in World War I on a scale that hadn't happened before. But, Middle Ages, they'd fling carcasses of cows into cities and hope the disease gets them. Just a little bit of a more primitive tech. But same principle of what human beings are trying to do to other human beings. So I don't want to be lulled into complacency about these things. I don't want to take living in a sinful world as if this is normal, and that this is how it's always going to be, because that means I've given up on the promises of God towards us, that he will come and rescue us and give us a new heavens and a new earth. I don't want to relinquish a hold of faith on those promises. But nor do I want to be somebody who's living in a state of constant anxiety because I'm reading the headlines every day and everything is significant and it's all happening, it's all happening, it's all happening, so I'm going to go light everybody else on fire. I think Jesus was cautioning us about that as well. Try to live in tension with these two things, trying to avoid both ditches here. You don't want to be gullible where everything happens, where everything is significant, and nor do you want to be extremely skeptical where nothing is significant. You want to be wise. You want to be wise. So I'll close with this. We need to be ready to get on the ark, so to speak, when the time comes. How did Noah find out it was time to get into the ark? God told him.
That's right.
God started moving the animals. 2 by 2 and 7 by 7. That's right. God started moving the animals, and God told Noah. So there should be no anxiety about being ready for the end. I think if you are building that relationship with Jesus every day, and you are listening for his voice, all right? You're not one of those Christians on autopilot, or I'm just doing my thing, I go do this, I read this, I pray this, I keep moving. But if you're listening for the Spirit of God to be speaking to you in your life and looking for direction from God, he will tell you when it's time. He'll tell you. Now, I don't know how everybody else understood the animals moving, if they just thought that was a strange migration where the goats and the lions decided to team up and go on vacation. I don't know how they explain these things, but God will do it, and those who are in Christ will recognize it for what it is. We'll recognize it for what it is. And that's the thing. We want signs. I want it written down for me so I can know exactly what's going to happen. But then it's not by faith.
No, that's right.
Then it's by math. Jesus told me this is going to happen. I see this, therefore this. You know, it's just my logic, right? He's not going to give us a list of signs because he wants us to be ready. And the only way to be ready is by faith. We have to be listening to him to know. And if that bothers us, it's because we're not living by faith. So I'm telling you guys, he doesn't answer this question that the disciples ask directly for a reason. Because the only way to be ready, the only way to know for sure is when he speaks to us and tells us. And when he speaks to you, he's going to speak to everybody who is his son or daughter too. And we're going to compare notes and we're going to know. And we're going to know. All right? So there needs to be no anxiety about the end times. If we are in Christ, there's nothing to worry about at all. He'll just say, Matthew, he'll say, Randy, he'll say, Willie, get in the boat. It's time to go. All right. We're good. So stay close to Jesus and don't do Christianity on autopilot. Build that relationship with him. Get to know God. Get to listen for his voice. And he will not lead us wrong. He'll tell us when it is time. And we'll be ready by his grace. Let's pray. Father above, I thank you very much for this passage in Matthew, a passage that I don't know if your son Jesus was ever planning on saying, maybe at a later time, but we have it in answer to disciples' questions. And I'm thankful for it because I think it is good counsel for us. It's good counsel to myriads of other Christians who have lived over the past 2,000 years. It's a secret, it's a key to not living with constant anxiety or constant skepticism. We want to avoid both of those approaches, Lord, and live with faithful obedience to you. We want to just connect with you again today. We want to connect with you again this week and just give us an experience where we hear your voice in our lives. Some of us have gone an awfully long time before we've heard you say something. We're just doing the best job we can do, but man, we want to hear from you. So if there's a left turn, a right turn, or stay the course, or turn around, or whatever it is that you have for us, Lord, this is a moment where we just want our hearts to be open, and we want you to speak to us on this Sabbath and guide us and tell us what it is that you want us to know and give us the courage to follow. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for taking the time to watch this message. I want to invite you, though, to join our next Sabbath stream. They happen live on Saturdays at 9:30 a.m. Central. You can find it right here on YouTube or on Facebook, or you can download our Peoria Adventist app and watch it on your phone, iPad, or Apple TV. I think even Roku is in there somewhere. Anyways, may God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you next Sabbath.